Hi Whisky lovers, Don here. Welcome to the Whisky Don. I have a real treat for you today. I've been chatting with Reg Vallintine, one of the most celebrated divers, and he's got the most amazing whisky story to tell. He's worked with the likes of Jacques Cousteau and Hans Haas. He's brought up sunken treasures from Roman ships, and he's even worked on the excavation of Henry VIII's warship, the Mary Rose. So of course, he's dived the most famous whisky wreck of all, the SS Politician of Whisky Galore fame. 80 years ago today, on the 5th of February 1941, the ship ran aground off the coast of Eriskay in the Hebrides, spilling its cargo, which included 22,000 cases of whisky. The local residents thanked the whisky gods as they were starting to run dry due to wartime rationing. Reg has 3 salvaged bottles to show us, and with family help has generously filmed himself answering some Whisky Don questions about the day he went diving for whisky. I started by asking him about the SS Politician.
It was a steamer commanded by Captain Beaconsfield Worthington. It was on a North Circle route to the States to take these goodies to America. The mate was in charge, and suddenly, in the middle of the night, one of the crew shouted, "Battleship on the port bow," and they hit this sandbank called Calvi, which is between Eriskay and South Uster. And while Captain Beaconsfield was getting himself together coming up, the mate shouted, "Abandon ship," and one boat was away, rowing bravely into the night, and they landed not on Calvi but on the main, what they thought was an island nearby, and they built a fire there, and they wondered whether they'd be recovered or where they were. Anyway, when these guys woke up in the morning, they were on Eriskay, surrounded by houses. So of course the locals came down because they could see the ship broken its back on this sandbank, and they went out, and of course soon they said, "What's your cargo?" And they said, 20,000 cases of whisky. And there must have been a silent hush. So they got the crew rapidly ashore, and then they got fishing rods and everything they could, and decamped for the wreck and began to excavate the cases of whisky. And they had 7,000 of them they took ashore.
Tell us about the day that you were lucky enough to get hold of some of the whisky.
Right, well, we heard about the Politician. I dived in the Hebrides before with some friends from Stornoway. I had an invitation to something called the Royal Navy Divers Dinner, which was a tremendous boozy effort which went on for hours and hours. And I finished up with a young Navy diver who told me that he'd actually dived on the Politician, the Whisky Galore wreck. So he got out an envelope out of his pocket and drew Eriskay and South Uist, the Hebrides, with a cross where the wreck was. So I went up there and met up with my friends who I dived with in the Hebrides on the 25th anniversary of the sinking. And I thought, well, it's going to be difficult to find, because wrecks aren't always easy to find. And one of my friends who had the cafe up there said, "Oh, don't worry, there's John McIsaac has a boat. I know he knows where the wreck is." I said, "Oh yes." So we went out on this morning. It was a lovely morning, nice and calm. And he went out, and after a little while, he anchored, and we were in lovely clear water. You could look down from the surface and see the sand bottom, and also the shape of a wreck. I couldn't believe it. So over we went down. I thought, well, now it's going to be difficult to find the bottles. They'd be somewhere in the hold or something. And blow me, a few minutes later, we were bringing bottles up. Obviously it was a memorable dive. I mean, we got a lobster as well.
How deep was the wreck?
So it was quite shallow. I would say about 15 metres, what do you work in metres now? 40 feet, 50 feet. About equivalent to the Mary Rose, funnily enough.
And how many bottles did you find?
About, I had about 30, so I suppose there were also about, the others must have had their share as well. Yes, I gave, one or two away, as one does to old friends. I cut out a piece of the chart of where it was, to make it a sort of souvenir. And they just seem to have disappeared.
And I believe you tasted the whiskey that day too.
When we got up the bottles, somebody said, one of us said, oh, let's try them, you see. So we opened one and poured it out, and it tasted like a mixture of whiskey and bad eggs. You could swallow it if you were dying of thirst, but you wouldn't enjoy it. We drank, a couple of strips and swallows, and then somebody said, well, open a bottle of good whiskey, And we left what was left in the glass, and 5 minutes later it turned black. Because each of these bottles has on it, federal law prevents the resale of this liquid set in the glass.
Yeah, no tax had been paid, so the excisemen were on their way to Ariskay too.
What they were interested in at the time was recovering the whiskey, because the cargo was fur coats and brandy and 20,000 cases of whiskey. And of course, the locals had helped themselves to that. They had it buried in the peat. Of course, the excise men came round and started going through the houses, and they were lining hiding it everywhere, because apart from the peat, they had a lot that they were using, and it got in the systems of the loos, anywhere they could think to pour it out, where it wouldn't be seen.
Brilliant stories. Reg, thank you so much for talking to us. It's been an absolute pleasure. I've just got one final question. What's your abiding memory of the day you went on that whiskey dive?
It was just unbelievably easy, because having, searched for wrecks in all sorts of places, that when people sort of say, oh, the wreck is there, oh yeah, and you get up there and there's a massive sea forever, and George Wookey, who told me about it, said it's all overgrown with weeds, and there it was just amazing.
Amazing indeed. Thank you so much, Reg Vallintine, the coolest 90-year-old I know. Cheers.